and folks are still getting ready to join us. So as they are, I just want to say hello, Miss Risha Grant. Happy Friday and happy hour. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. You guys, I'm so excited to be here today with Risha, and I can't wait to have a conversation with her, but I just want to give her a brief introduction, and then I will let her introduce herself. So Risha Grant is a diversity inclusion expert who talks about BS, and she was really passionate about understanding her own biases. And I love how she says it. We have to correct societal isms. So we've got racism and sexism and classism, and as you say, stupidism, which you can't fix stupid. So I don't know what hope we have there, but I'm so happy to have you here today. Folks, as you're joining, drop a line and let us know where you're from. Please chat in your questions. All right, Miss Risha, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be able to do this. And can I say I'm a country girl from a small town in Oklahoma. I now live in Tulsa, where a lot of you probably saw us splashed across the national news all last weekend. Basketball was my first love, and kind of lived through that vicariously through my 12-year-old nephew. And I love going out there and being able to shift hearts and minds.
Well, right now, it was like enough to have COVID, and everybody was freaking out and exhausted and dealing with all of that. And it seemed like for a second it started to settle down, and then stuff hit the fan, and everything else started happening. And so what I'd love to know a little bit more about what you do, what you speak about, and then I'd love to just talk about your perception of stuff that's going on, and get your ideas on what we do to make it better. Because I know we have really great conversations, but then a lot of times it just sits there. We don't do anything. We don't take action. Right. So tell me about your background. How did you get involved in this area, and what's your life all about?
I got involved a long time ago in high school, and it really stemmed from a place of not learning enough about who Black people were outside of slavery. So you sit in history and learn all of this stuff, and you'd hear about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman, but then you just heard about slavery. And as a kid, that's just... it's difficult to even process the pride of the things that slaves accomplished and all of those things. So for me, I would just kind of sit there and couldn't wait for it to be over. And actually got into this argument, my best friend and I, and the history teacher, about who Cleopatra was and was she a person of color. And it just kind of did something inside me where I thought, if they're not going to educate me and they don't believe this stuff, every paper that I had the opportunity to pick the topic, I picked it up. I picked something that had to do with Black history so that I could educate. And it was something that I haven't been able to get rid of. I have a passion about it. And in college, I was really trying to decide, should I major in African-American history or media? And so I found a way to marry both of those and started Oklahoma's first diversity communications firm. And that was almost 25 years ago, and I'm still at it.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So who do you work predominantly with?
Corporations, mostly corporations. We work with some university and college. But yeah, mostly a lot of names you've heard of, and probably a lot that you haven't. But I finished last year with almost 50 speaking engagements, so a lot of travel.
Yes, I am right there with you. And I told you before we joined, I was on a plane 3 or 4 days a week, and at the time I was like desperate to get off a plane. And I have absolutely loved being home, like getting to be with my family and my dogs, and getting to just chill and do my thing here is great. But I do miss the connection of being on a stage and talking with people and feeling that human connection.
Right. Yeah, at first it was great, but I'm ready to get out again.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. Well, so, it's interesting because I've been speaking for 20 years, and at the beginning of my career, you didn't hear as much about diversity and inclusion. And as I've worked with corporate clients in the past decade, it's become much more of a conversation. But I think until you have something happen that, and unfortunately it takes something super drastic to make us stop and have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing from your corporate leaders? What are the kinds of conversations they're having, and how are they keeping folks engaged in that discussion?
They're definitely having conversations around race. I have spent a lot of time this month facilitating those conversations. I will say this though, as important as conversation is, it's just that, it's conversation. And so depending on who you are, conversation is great because historically we've been told at work, you keep away from politics, religion, and race. Well, now race is front and center, and we can't ignore it. The things that are happening in the world are so egregious that the people that it's happening to, those feelings don't just wait for us to get home in the evening from work and then we pick up where we left off. We're carrying that everywhere we go. So while some people, these conversations are really important for Black folk and people of color, we've been having these conversations since we were born.
Right.
So you need the conversation, but you need the action. So what I am telling my clients is, this is great. This is a great first start. Let's hear from everybody. Let's figure out what those next steps are, but there has to be action behind those words.
So first, let me take a step back, because you talk a lot about BS. What is BS? And we hear these terms, unconscious bias, and I think sometimes we throw them around like buzzwords, and I'm wondering if you can help kind of clarify and define for us a little bit about what BS is, what is an unconscious bias, and how do you recognize them in yourself?
So what I do on a daily basis is help people get rid of the BS. And BS stands for bias synapse, which is the brain's role in unconscious bias, but it's a play on bullshit. Because when we treat people badly based on some diverse characteristic like their race or ethnicity, their age, their gender, I think that's the bullshit side of it. But we do grow up with these unconscious biases because we're living through the past hurts and pains of the people who raised us. So my definition for unconscious bias is that it's an unrecognizable part of our upbringing. So I came up with a system, 3-step system called permission granted. And it's called that because we don't give ourselves permission to feel however it is that we feel, because society says you can't feel like this, you shouldn't feel like this. The reality is that's how we feel. But we have to be willing to say, okay, I have these feelings. What do I do to fix it? And how do I move forward? So my 3-step process is that you identify your biases first and foremost, you own them, and then you confront them. So in that first step of identifying your bias, for me, I recognized that I had a mistrust of white people. And that comes from years of things, validated bias from my parents and grandparents of things that they went through, and then my own experiences. And so I recognize that though for what it is. Religion is another bias I have. I think heaven should be easy to get into, but it's not. Religion is very divisive. And so I think it's supposed to be about love. And then, I always share with my audiences, my other one was that I didn't understand girls who wanted to be boys and boys who wanted to be girls. Now, yes, I'm talking about transgender, but I realized that statement is ignorant. It's just that when I started my journey, that's what I thought it was. And that's where many people still are, but if you do the work, and my deal about transgender people is I didn't want to mispronounce pronouns or, mess up pronouns. And so for me, people, especially when you're in this work, they just kind of expect you to get it right. But when our brains work on autopilot, and so your brain sees someone as a certain gender and it connects with that. And you have to work hard to turn the autopilot off and say, no, this person wants to be identified differently. And so we have to do the work. And so now that I've done that work, I think transgender people are some of the most courageous people I've ever met. So those are the things that I identified about myself. And then again, it was owning it. So when you own it and you say aloud, I don't trust any white people in the whole world, well, it sounds like the BS that it is. And it's really not, it's really not the truth of how we feel. Because if you look at it, if I were to look at that, I've had just as many Black people and people of color that have done things that have caused mistrust, but I give grace in those areas, because that person, I can identify with that person. That person looks like me, and I may understand some of the things that they've gone through, and because I'm around more people of color, I probably have had more issues there. But that's the bullshit part, because we know better than these things. We know that we have to deal with people for who they are to us, what they've done, not what they've done to all these other people that we know, because we don't know the full stories there. We don't know what all happened. And I'm not saying the things that happened to my grandmother didn't happen, because they did. She definitely had a validated bias, but you also have to deal with people for how it is that they treat you. And that's the part that we're not doing very well.
It's interesting because I just read research that trauma can be carried through generations genetically. And so we can have a predisposition, even if it's not something, I'm Jewish. And so my grandparents and their family were in the time of the Holocaust. And so it's said that you can have a lot of that trauma passed down, and you might not even know where it comes from. You just innately have it. But I'm curious about so many things. Last week, Strother Gaines, one of our facilitators, spoke on Facebook, and he identifies as queer, and we were talking about equality and judgment and all of those other things, and he said, my heart goes out to Black transgender women, because they're the most vulnerable population.
Yes.
And that it's something that, I guess that's the definition of privilege, that I've never had to consider that, right? It's never even crossed my mind. But
go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No. I was just going to say I hate that I've not had these conversations as much before, but I'm learning so much from listening.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the thing with Black trans women is this has been going on for years. For years. And, I would even say I haven't done enough to, when I hear about it, posting it on my Facebook page, posting it on my social media, because that's where we can be allies. That's where we can have a voice. I believe that each one of us is a center of influence to somebody in our lives, and they need to see us doing the right things, even when it's unpopular. And for me, I just didn't think about it in the way that I should have. And so this has been going on for a long time for Black trans women. It's not news. So there are so many areas that as human beings that we're missing the mark on.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I studied, communication, and one of the things they talk about is that you have these conscious biases, or these, conscious competence, things that and then there's conscious incompetence, things you don't know. But then you've got this unconscious incompetence. They're things that you don't even know you don't know. And so you were talking about the first step in your process, which is like identifying your biases. And you said you were able to identify some of yours. How do you suggest, part of that, I think, is self-awareness and an emotional intelligence ability, but what do you say to folks who really are curious about how to uncover their own biases that they may not even be aware of?
The simplest thing to ask yourself is, who makes me uncomfortable and why? And you go from there. So I typically ask my audiences to imagine that they're on an airplane and they've announced that the flight is completely full, but that middle seat next to you is open. And we've all done it before. We're sitting there watching people come down the aisle, praying they don't sit there, for whatever reason. It may be the person with the kid strapped to the front that's already screaming, and you're like, oh no, please don't sit here. It can be an overweight person, and you're worried about having space. Yep. It could be a person with facial tats. So when I ask my audiences, well, who in here doesn't want to sit next to the obese person? I mean, almost everybody raises their hand. When I say why, they say, oh, it's a comfort issue. And then I say, is that it? You know, what else do you think? And then some, depending on the audience, you know, some people will admit to odor, or I have to bring odor up. You know, like they're going to have an odor. Well, you know, so do people who cook differently from different countries have an odor. I've sat in first class many times, and there are a lot of well-dressed people up there who just don't bathe. You know, they're so, you know, it is a, if you say to, if you say to yourself, why am I so uncomfortable? You know, and facial tats, man, people don't want to sit next to those people. But I always tell them, for me, I know it's going to be a great conversation. And I have another bias that comes out with that, because I'm thinking, hey, so what kind of business do you own? Because surely you work for yourself. You've kind of tatted an AK-47 across your forehead. You know, that's an indication that you most likely work for yourself. But if you will allow yourself in that situation to honestly, you know, say, you know what, I'm gonna ask this person one question, because you'll begin to break down those barriers. You'll begin to see, why am I uncomfortable with this person? You know, and then determine for yourself what that is. And then next you attribute it. Now, am I having a problem with this person with facial tats because it's my issue, or is this his fault? It's your issue. You may never see that person again. Who cares what somebody else puts on their face? Has nothing to do with you. You know, and then identify where that comes from, because the more deeply rooted it is, it just means that it's harder to get rid of. You know, something, if you've dealt with something since you were born, you know, that bias is introduced, unconscious bias is introduced to us so smoothly that we have no idea it's even happening. So it's incumbent upon us to figure it out. And those steps that I just mentioned, those are what I call the BS finder. You know, who makes you uncomfortable and why? And begin to ask yourself questions. Why don't I want to sit next to the Black person? Why do I always feel fear when I see a Black man? Why is it that these facial tattoos are making me, you know, because if you think about it, when that person sits next to you, you just kind of sit there the whole time like this, hoping they don't even touch you. Whereas, and they're all sprawled out, chilling, you know, like, this is cool flight. And you're just like irritated the entire time, when you could actually take this time to break down some of those barriers that you put up.
So that's the question I have. How do you do that in a respectful way? You know, when everything started happening with George Floyd and the news really started picking up, and I have a client who said, how do you plan to address this? And I thought, how would you want to address it? Like, how would you want your team to start talking about it? And he said, well, I have lots of people who have questions but are afraid to ask them because they don't want to be perceived as ignorant. So what do you say to someone who wants to start having these conversations to identify their own biases? Because we all have them. I mean, Harvard has this online assessment you can take, and I took it, and it said I have a bias against old people, which in a million years never would have thought that was the case. And I think they kind of screw it up because you have to hit like these different letters, and they show you faces.
I agree.
Yeah, and you agree? Like, it's kind of wonky.
I'm not sure about that test.
Yeah, I didn't think so either. But it's a cool, at least just exercise to get you thinking about things that you might not have otherwise thought about. How do you suggest people start the conversation? I know there's like these videos. There's a guy in Austin. It's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And he's put out a whole series of videos on YouTube about like starting these conversations. But if I'm sitting next to you on a plane and we've never met before, I might not feel comfortable going, talk to me about, you know, talk to me about your history and your background and what it feels like to be a Black woman and a business owner. And I don't know, is that something that people should just be more open about?
Well, I'm not sure I would just try to have a conversation about, you know, something as serious as George Floyd on a plane. I think that you have to build authentic relationship with people so that you can have tough conversations. Now I just, probably because of the work I do, I've had those types of conversations with strangers. But I'm going to say, if I'm so uncomfortable sitting next to the person with facial tat, I'm going to say, hey, tell me about that tattoo. That's interesting. You know, and if they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. But I don't mind starting conversations with people that are less invasive And if we grow into, because people will say to me, hey, I once they, you sit there and, well, what do you do? Well, I do this. Oh my gosh. So then it opens up a door for me, to be able to have those conversations. But I think when we're in companies and people are trying to figure out how to have the conversations, I think first we need to educate ourselves as much as possible. More than any other time in my life, there are so many resources out there. I mean, books, Netflix, movies, podcasts. You can educate yourself if you want to. And then if you look around and you really don't have anybody that's different from you to talk to, that says something as well. You need to broaden your circle so that you can begin to have these conversations. When it comes to work, I think the one of the first things that companies need to do is listen. They need to listen. It's not so much about talking. I've been talking to different leadership teams and saying, you listen, you validate, you act. Those are the things that you're doing right now. And even realize in starting these conversations that you're still asking people of color to share all of their feelings and all of the things that they fear and that they're frustrated and angry and hurt about. So if you ask them to share and they actually share, then you can't get upset about what they share.
Exactly.
Because
That's
the
their
thing,
right? Nobody. Right. And what, we've seen Hollywood and products, everything from Aunt Jemima to Splash Mountain at Disney, cops being canceled. And I'm just praying they don't cancel Law and Order SVU, because Olivia Benson is my jam and I don't know what I'd do without her. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's like, you like
no,
Olivia
I didn't hear
too?
that they're canceling. I love Olivia. They're canceling SUV for what?
So there was an article saying that they were considering it because they had canceled Cops and Live PD and all those other things. And I was just saying they better not cancel Olivia because I need that woman in my life. But what do you say about that? Is it overboard? Is it not enough? Is it too soon, too late? Like, what's your thought on the cancel culture?
So this is my thing with that. If you have not, for all of your life, seen positive images of your heritage and everything that's been built of products and things that in America that have been built up on making you seem like you're less than, it is very difficult to accept that stuff. But that's what we've done all of these years. We know who Aunt Jemima is. We know that that's a negative stereotype. We know who Sambo is. We know that these characters and these logos and all these things were built on something that was hurtful, and not just hurtful. Because some of them go back so far that there's violence attached to it. There's blood attached to it. My thing about the statues, and you start talking about erasing history, we don't have to erase history. But you know what? If I pay to go to college or university, and as expensive as that is, I probably don't want to look at a statue of a person that used to hang Black people. I just don't. So why not take that statue and all the ones, and DC is a great place for people to go and visit statues and museums and all of those things, and put it in there and let people who want to see it. But to just have these things that are reminders for so many people of such heinous crimes and hurtful things, that's difficult. And you have to think about how it is, just how it's portrayed in America. For instance, Father's Day last Sunday, went to buy my dad a card, and I couldn't find one card that showed a Black man and a Black daughter, just to identify with who he is and who I am. Now, there used to be a line. I was really excited because most of my life I've said, I just can't even find a card those cards don't speak to my life. They don't speak to my family. So, man, that something that simple is so difficult to find. And so if you grow up like that, like you never see those images, then yeah, you get really tired of that.
I think when you start to experience that from a different perspective, like that's not something, when I heard Lady Antebellum was changing their name, and Faith Hill, was talking about changing the Mississippi flag, and you've got all of these things. I don't think until, at least, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it was until just now in time that people are really starting to revolt against it. And I mean, people of every color, creed, background, economic status, wrong is wrong, right? I mean, like, bad is bad. And so I think that we're finally at a point where we're breaking through these conversations. When you've got an organization, so let's say you've got an organization that has a diversity and inclusion program. So a lot of the teams that I work with, they'll have a employee resource group for lesbian, gay, bisexual. They'll have a resource group for African Americans. They'll have a resource group for Asian Americans, a resource group for, is that the right approach for organizations to take? Or is there a different way to make it part of the organizational culture where you don't even have to do that because it's just expected that everybody is treated well?
Mm-hmm. That is the goal, that you shouldn't have it. It should be built organically into who you are, into the fabric of your corporate culture. But we know that's not the case. So when you see groups that are the African American group, the LGBT plus group, and all of those, that is because they need to have a voice. They're trying to figure out, how can I be heard? And it's just like, people ask me, well, you guys, Black people want inclusion, but you have BET, you have Black Entertainment Television, you have all of these publications, Ebony and Essence. Those things are started because there's a lack of representation everywhere else. Same thing with ERGs. If you look at a lot of ERGs, they're talking about, how do I celebrate my culture at this company? How do I create a mentorship program so that people that look like me have equitable opportunity? Systemic racism is real. It's real, and it was based upon disproportionate opportunities for some people. Those people being Black folk and people of color. So you have to begin to break that down. And so when you see ERGs appear, ERGs, employee resource groups, for those of you that don't know, are designed to provide a voice for these different diverse groups. Now, I think where they get it wrong is if they remain exclusionary and you never work toward that goal. I don't think that, well, let me say, I think that at some point the groups have to be able to come together, and the
Right.
goals of each group need to align with the company goals and create that voice for you, but designed to become inclusive.
And it's hard to do that. My stepdaughter Riley, she just graduated from high school. She is Korean, so her mom is from Korea. My husband, her dad, is Irish, so she's Korea-ish. But as she was applying to colleges, she was actually, she had put Asian American on her applications because she's Asian, and she was denied and told that they had to limit. Basically, the feedback that she got, in not so a direct way, was, we have too many Asian kids applying. You need to be more white. And so what happens when it starts happening in the other direction and you start seeing other discrimination as a result of a practice that's supposed to create equality?
Because we're not equitable. If we would just create equity means that, everybody has the same opportunities. What's happening is this group hasn't had it for so long that now that you fought for it, you're continuing to fight. Like, the way that things are set up, there's this pie, and you feel like there are just so many pieces of pie here, and we're fighting for those pieces, when if we would leave it whole and focus on this thing together as the human race, we wouldn't worry about scarcity of who can get in and who can't get in.
Right.
You know, we've got to change the systems. The systems have to be broken down. No, not broken down, dismantled, and then created with equity in mind so that it's inclusive of everybody. Because otherwise, we're going to keep fighting for these singular pieces of pies that is not enough to feed you anyway.
It's such an interesting metaphor. It's a great way to look at it. And I think you're right. I think we do, as a society in general, come at things from a place of lack or fear or, you know, competitive need to make sure I get mine. And then when we take a step back, if you come at it from a place of abundance and we're just here to learn and we're here to listen and we're here to be curious. I mean, I think sometimes it's so simple, we make it so complicated. If we were to just, yeah. Well, you talk about this idea of radical acceptance, and I love the phrase. I want you to tell me more about what it means to you.
Radical acceptance to me is the willingness to lose everything to be you. Literally, we go through life being who we think will make our parents happy, will help us keep our husbands and spouses and wives and whatever happy. We want people to be proud of us, you know, and it could be something as simple as I always wanted to be a basketball coach, but my parents want me to be an attorney or a doctor. And we live this way in a sense that it diminishes who we are because we only get one chance at this thing called life. And the least we can do is do what we want to do with it. And a lot of us aren't living that way. We're living under the auspices of normal too. And the problem I have with normal is that a set of people a long time ago established what normal looks like, but didn't bother to ask the rest of the world that would be included.
Right.
So a lot of people, you know, they're kind of bumping through the night. And I think it's the reason that so many people are hurt and they're sad and they're suicidal and all of these things, because we're not giving people basic human decency and value just simply for being another human being.
And I can't understand why that is so hard for people to wrap their head around. Like, we bleed the same color. We have, obviously our experiences are different, but the human experience is shared. Everybody has hopefully happy moments and sad moments and fearful moments and moments where you're proud and moments where you feel shame. And I don't understand, you know, from the time my kids were very little, we had open conversations around all of this because in my mind, it was not acceptable to perpetuate a stereotype. But I look at like my grandmother, for example, who was from a completely different time period, and I wasn't even allowed to bring the conversation up ever. I mean, it was just not something she allowed me to talk about. Now, my mom and my family disagreed, thankfully. But what do you do for people who just like are so ignorant that they don't even understand they should be having the conversation? Do you just say screw it and leave them alone because you can't help them anyway?
Some people, yes. I mean, I just had this conversation over the holidays because it's like that's when people show up for family dinners and you're bringing somebody who grandma, you know, is, you know, we'll date someone, you know, maybe it's interracial, maybe it's a same-sex couple, and then we actually tell that person that we love and care about, hey, don't pay grandma any attention. She's going to say some stuff and, you know, just, we don't pay her any attention. Well, what you're really saying is, hey, grandma is a racist bigot, and but she's going to insult you and hurt you really bad, but don't say anything. And we actually invite people into that. And so I think what we have to do is tell those people when they're wrong. You can do that respectfully, and it may not go well, but if you try that so much and it gets to a point to where it's impacting kids pay attention to us. Even when we think they're playing video games, they're listening. They're picking this stuff up and they're learning how to behave. So if you may have to get to a point where we don't go to grandma's for Christmas this year. And that's tough, but maybe that's the thing that's going to help those people understand that you can't do this anymore. You can't, it's wrong. And I know that's big for, like, it would be huge for me, you know, it would be huge for me, but you've got to, at some point, you've got to take a different stance.
Yeah, because at what point do you just start enabling more of the thing you're trying to stop by being silent about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Your silence at some point is you agreeing.
Right. Like even inaction, everything we do is a choice, even inaction, even not saying something is still has meaning. Let's see what Catherine asked. What's the best way to respond to those that say there may be some racism with a select few, but look at all of the opportunities now for people of color? We had a Black president, so if things were still as bad as the 60s, he couldn't have become president. She said she just gets frustrated or offended and needs a better way to get her point across.
Best way to respond to those, yeah, there have been strides. I mean, you can agree with that. That's a factual statement, but ask yourself why there's been only one Black president. Ask yourself why there's one Oprah. Ask yourself why, when you look at some of these corporations that have 55,000 employees, there may be one person of color in senior leadership. You can just look at so many Fortune 500, 100 companies and probably count on two hands people of color that are in leadership positions. So we're so far from the fact that this is really not a problem anymore. It is a pervasive problem. It's pervasive. It plays across every area of our lives: housing, banking, healthcare, government, incarceration rates, you know, business. It's everywhere. So people can say that, but until you really understand how pervasive it is and understand that it creates disproportionate opportunities, you may not be able to get your point across.
And I think sometimes it's just that old saying, you got to agree to disagree. You're just not going to change somebody. You have to be willing to be open to the idea that you're right or wrong before you have the ability to listen. And some people, they're just not there yet.
And
I mean, you live in Oklahoma.
You have to be okay with that.
Like, talk to me about living in Oklahoma, because I would imagine, I mean, that's as red as you get. Talk to me about what that's like, and as a female business owner, what does that mean for you, and how does that work?
Oklahoma was a tough place to cut my teeth in, especially with diversity. You know, my mom and everybody, like, why are you doing this here? Like, because I was starving, literally. And I just kept thinking we need it the most. You know, Oklahoma is not known for its diversity. It never has been. We have a horrible, horrible racial past. You may have heard by now of the Tulsa Race Massacre that happened in 1921. It is the worst race riot on American soil. It happened 5 minutes from where I'm talking to you right now, from my home. 21 square blocks of the Black community was burned to the ground. And it was, I remember Langston Hughes said back then that if a Black person was looking to make it for economic stability, Tulsa was the place to be. There were Black doctors and surgeons and hospitals and movie theaters and things that you just didn't see Black people accomplish. And it was burned to the ground, literally. But they rebuilt it in 1942 or something like that. And so it showed the resilience. But once the city decided to put the interdispersal loop, the highway through the community, it killed it again, and it's never quite recovered. So being in Tulsa, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of pride. There has taken, like, we celebrate the 100 year of the Race Riot Massacre next year. And I don't know the word celebrate is the right word, but we acknowledge the 100 years. And we have just late last year started looking for the mass graves. So there's a lot going on in Tulsa. There's a lot of healing that needs to take place in Tulsa. And my biggest worry was with the rally this weekend that it was going to unravel some of the work that had already been done. And it has a little bit, but I hope that we continue to be resilient and continue to work through this stuff.
How do you I think everybody can understand the outrage of police brutality and, you know, the unfair treatment of people for nothing more than melatonin or the color of their skin. I mean, it's just bizarre to me.
Yeah.
But how did it go from peaceful protests where we're having open conversations to lighting things on fire? And it wasn't, you know, most of the news clips that I saw of people lighting stuff on fire, like there was a black man who owned a business who was getting the crap kicked out of him. He was an older man and he owned a business in downtown, wherever they were, and other black men were beating him. And so I think sometimes people are confused about how do you do it right? How do you have the conversation so that you're heard and so that it's receptive? And why do you have this propensity of some people to lean so far toward violence instead of just peaceful demonstrations?
So two areas of thought there. First of all, Martin Luther King said that rioting is the language of the unheard. I would love a peaceful protest, and I'm not for rioting, but also how long have we had peaceful there's a time and a place for everything. Radicals have had a place in this movement since the beginning. Somebody has to rock the boat. You know, there's a reason
Right.
Malcolm X was never called into the meetings with the president to help put policies and bills together. He was radical, but he was out there in the streets directing the community. But you had Martin Luther King, who was called in to talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. All of those people are needed because, and the thing is, racism and all these are not problems for Black people to solve. If Black people could have solved them, they would have already done it, you know, a long time ago. You see images from the 60s of people marching and singing and not bothering anybody, and dogs are released in water, and you have to fight back at some point in time. We're not being heard. We haven't been heard in most of my life. I'm so excited, cautiously optimistic about what's going on in the world right now because I see white people showing up in ways they have never shown up before. But to get back to looting, I don't agree with it, but I do understand it, because how do we create, you know, some people would say to you that the turning point in all of this, part of the turning point was when the Minneapolis Police Department was burned down. I don't know how you get attention because we've knocked nicely, the door's not been opened. We've sang in the street, we've had nonviolent movements. I don't think any of that was lost. I just don't think it's really interesting to me when people really start talking about looting, when you really look at the history of slavery, you look at the race riots that have occurred all throughout America. It didn't start with us. So now you're saying this is wrong, and I get it, but it's always been wrong. So why is it that we can see it here, but we can't see it there when it's brought up? You know, we have to be able to put ourselves in each other's shoes so that we can truly understand the humanity of what we're feeling, what each group is feeling.
How do you do that? I mean, I'm empathy is one of those skills that it is teachable. Some people are born with higher levels of it than others, but how do you teach compassion? How do you teach empathy to an entire society that has, you know, what percentage of your life do you think has been people asking you, how can I help? How can I be better? How can I make a difference versus here's what you need to do?
It's always been about here's what you need to do. People have just started asking that question, in all honesty. And I think we teach compassion by standing up for what's wrong and what's right. Those little people that you're raising need to see that. They need to see you saying, this is not okay. You know, we can't gloss over it, because when we don't stand up and we don't say anything, we're teaching that as well. You're teaching, whether you're intentionally teaching or not, you're teaching. People are watching. We all have a responsibility to leave this world better than we found it. So we've got to figure out what that means and what that looks like.
What does that look like for you? Like, what if you could say, here's my legacy when I go, here's what I want to be remembered for? What would it be?
Shifting hearts and minds. I'm always working on that for myself, and I want people to understand different perspectives. I want people to say, you know what, am I thinking about this wrong? Because at least if you ask yourself that, you're open to realizing that maybe you've been taught wrong about something. And that can be hard to do. Like, I don't really think this stuff is that difficult, but I think it's difficult. I think its complexity comes from the fact that you're going to realize there are some things about yourself that aren't that great, and you need to fix them. And in fixing them, it helps you become a better person. It helps the people that you touch become better people. So we really have to be willing to do the work. We have to educate ourselves. We have to be able to talk to people. We have to apologize when we know that we've made a misstep. You know, we have to be vulnerable. Like, all these things that people don't like to be. That's what it's going to take.
And I think that sometimes we underestimate the power of vulnerability in connection. Like, you have to be able to be willing to be wrong, to be willing to be hurt, to be willing to say the wrong thing in order to find a way to say the right thing. And I think people are just afraid to do that because they don't want to look bad or be perceived poorly.
But it already looks bad.
Right.
It already looks bad. And so you not saying anything speaks volumes.
Right. Exactly. So what is the best way that people can help you in changing hearts and minds? If we've got folks who are listening and say, you know what, I really want to do something to make a difference, to stand up, to fight for what's right, to teach my kids the right way. What do you say? How can people help you in your mission?
Start educating yourself. Education is be a lifetime learner, because we really have been taught a lot of things wrong, because it's been taught in a system that was not designed for everybody. So when you really begin to do the history yourself, like, race in and of itself is a social construct. Race is a social construct. It was developed to create superiority. Race is really about who lived closer to the equator and all of this stuff, and, you know, our skin tones, and has nothing to do with the levels of superiority that we've assigned to stuff like that, or the normalcy of what's beautiful. Those are things that we made up. By we, I mean, you know, man. Those are things that that we can change. So we have to undo what's been done, and it is hard work. It's not easy, because you literally start learning this stuff and you're just like, your mind's exploding. Like, are you kidding me? There are so many things that if you'll just take the time to learn them, we could flip this thing on its head, and we could actually create a world where everybody feels valued, where everybody has equity. You know, I think we strive for equality a lot, and the difference with equality is that there's always going to be someone that has more money, has more, and you'll always have that. But with equity, you're creating the same possibility, the same opportunity for everybody to achieve the same. Right now, we don't have that.
Oh, I love that differentiation. It's not something that I had really thought about before you said it, that, you know, there'll never be, not that it'll never be equality, but the equity, the opportunity benchmark is where there needs to be. And then it's based on merit. Then it's based on work ethic. Then it's based on, you know, your ability to connect with people. But everybody deserves to have the same starting point.
Exactly. Yeah. That's all I'm saying. I mean, you know, when you think about when you really think about racism and you think about how far back this goes, you are talking about a race of people who were brought to America and not taught how to read, how to write, how to do any of those things, who had to learn the language on their own and learn to read and create all of these things from nothing. And to me, that's the way to teach history. That's the way to help people understand that, yeah, this history is not great, but man, these people did some amazing things. And that's not the way we're learning it. That's not, you know, a young Black kid sitting in school learning about slavery is feeling probably really dealing with some confidence and esteem issues, because man, those are horrible images to try to explain to somebody in grade school.
Well, and when you said that about school, the image that came to my mind, and it's such a visceral memory. I moved to Texas in the 4th grade from Connecticut. And I remember taking a class called Texas history. You never live in another state and take like Oklahoma history. You know, they don't have like New Jersey history, but apparently Texas is very proud. And we had a whole history class just about Texas. But I'll never forget, my teacher, Mrs. Garza, was like, swore up and down to us that the Holocaust never happened. And I remember being like, wait, I'm sorry, what did you say? And she was like, oh, you're from Connecticut. It's like,
okay. Well, see, you said you had we had Oklahoma history. You had to take it. It was not an elective course. But nowhere in that book was the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Are you kidding?
You know, no, not at all. There are some people who just found out about that massacre, you know, probably this year. It has been covered up. I mean, and if you are required to take Oklahoma history, how is that not a part of the book?
Right.
They just last year, we have a Race Riot Centennial Commission, and they just made it mandatory for history teachers to teach the race massacre. Just last year, 2019, 98 years later.
That's bullshit. I mean, that's BS right there. I mean, if you're talking about it. You said something that I loved. You said, you know, our biases don't just keep other people out. They also lock us in and prevent us from having rich and rewarding relationships. And I think that it is so profound, because it's not just about us being unwilling to have a different vantage point. It's this guarding that you miss out on so many beautiful life experiences. You know, Evan, my son, has some severe special needs, and we had an in-home caregiver, Michael, from Tanzania, Africa. And I mean, Michael is from Michigan. After Tanzania, he moved to Michigan, and he is the most refined, well-dressed, well-spoken, loving, intelligent man. And I remember him like almost in tears on the way he got to our house one day, and said he was stopped by a police officer. And he said, I mean, he was asked to get out of his car. He was asked to put his hands on the car and asked to put on the hood. And it's just like, I mean, you couldn't find a more well-dressed person if you tried, a more eloquent, well-spoken, well-traveled. He knows 5 languages. I mean, the man is brilliant. And the fact that he was treated like that, and it makes me sad that people wouldn't even are missing an opportunity to have a friend like that, are missing an opportunity to have a friend like you.
Well, but the color of our skin speaks louder than anything we're saying to some people. You know, when as a Black person, like, you are taught that everything about you have to do better. You have to know more. You have to dress better, because it's already so difficult for them to see past all of that, that if you do anything that is going to alter that at all, you're not going to be heard. They're going to get stuck on something outward, because I can't change my skin color, but I can make sure that I dress really nice. I can make sure that I sound educated all the time. I can make sure I don't have a hair out of place. I can give you the best proposal for this business. I can do all of those things. But if I mess any of them up, it reverts you back to the biases that you already had in your brain about me. And that's a very difficult way to live.
What was it like for you Because as a female running my own business, I mean, I've come up against lots of different obstacles. What was your experience building a business in Oklahoma as a female who is also a Black woman?
You know, I always thought maybe being a woman has something to do with it, but I always felt as if it had to do with my color. It was difficult because when I would join organizations and go to the meetings, you know, to network, no one ever went out of their way to just say hello. You know, I always had to go and, you know, create that welcome environment. Let everybody know it's okay to talk to me. You know, there's 300 or 400 people in here, and not one person is, you know, they have the little bistro tables and everybody has a drink and they're all talking. I could be sitting there at one by myself all night. I have to go and interject myself, and it's almost like, oh, okay, she's cool, you know, or because I was doing diversity, nobody understood that. I've been in business almost 25 years. I probably spent 18 of those years just educating people on why they should even care about diversity and inclusion. I used to switch my voice. In the beginning, I made cold calls. I started with a video production company and will produce commercials for other businesses. So I read in a book that if I started making cold calls at 6 a.m., I would get the CEOs and decision makers and, you know, kind of bypass the assistants and all of that. So yeah, it worked. It was great advice, but I always try to change my voice so that I didn't sound Black, so that I would get past that part of it. So there were so many things that I felt the need to do. For instance, when proposals were due for, you know, for whatever contract, my proposals were, I mean, I tried to make sure there was no human error in them, even though that's impossible, you know, and they were slick. They looked great. Then I would see a counterpart's proposal. It's like 2 pages and it's just bullet points. And I've got this, I mean, you know, it's stuff like that that don't understand. It's hard to understand, you know, and I hate to play the race card. Most people, Black people that I know, hate to play the race card. And I guarantee you, before they play it, they've talked to everybody they can think of to talk to run by, to understand, is this me, or am I seeing this the right way? Mm-hmm. Because you begin to doubt yourself because you always hear, well, that's not it. Well, what else is it? What do I need to work on? How can I be a better businesswoman? What do I need to do? Because I'm looking at this 2-page bullet point proposal. I'm looking at this, and that's missing a whole lot. And I keep getting passed over. So if it's something I'm doing, I really want to know what it is so that I can become better. And I would ask that question all the time. And I always get, no, Risha, you're great. Okay, then explain this to me, because I'm about to start thinking that it has to do with my race. So
that's an important point, I think, for a lot of people to think about. Like, the fact that you have to work so hard to get equity, right? The fact that you have to feel like you have to change your voice, or you have to outperform or dress better or speak better or read more, or it's ridiculous, I think, in the 21st century that we're still having this conversation. But I'm so incredibly grateful that you were willing to have it. What is the question we should be asking? Like, what should I be asking you right now? What should we leave with?
We should be asking, what's next? What's next? We've had the conversations. We're having the listening sessions. Where do we go from here? I believe that is the ultimate question. How do we keep? So I heard someone say so eloquently the other day, there's a moment and there's a movement. Are you going to be a part of the moment? Or are you going to be a part of the movement?
I love that.
It's so profound to me, because that is what it's about. It's about being a part of the movement to create change. That's what is next.
Well, Amy on my team is listening, and Amy, we got to get that, because that is so beautiful. I love that. Are you trying to be part of the moment or part of the movement? Yeah. Because it's bigger than just right this second in history. And I think we have a big opportunity to make a radical shift. And I love your everything about you, really, but I love your authenticity. I love your honesty. I love that you're willing to put yourself out there and have these conversations, because I know that it can't be easy. And if there's anything that I can do or anyone on my team can do to support you, I will do it wholeheartedly. But I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, and for everybody today, thank you for joining. And like I said, if there's anything I can do for you, please holler. I would love to.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. And we're taking July 4th weekend off. So we will be back the following week, and look forward to seeing you then. Bye, everyone.